we've long said that our biggest competition is not another company, it's skepticism.
If someone gets a letter and the letter says, in order to receive your inheritance, please send us your bank account information.
One of the things we say is we will never ask you for your bank account information, your credit card. We will never ask you to give us a dime until you've gotten paid. We work on a contingency basis.
What are some of those like warning signs that people should be staying far away from?
Things like asking for information upfront or saying, hey, I want an upfront fee. That's a major red flag.
So what happens to it? Welcome to the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. If you ever asked, how do I protect myself and those I love if something unexpected happened to me? You're in the right place. I'm your host, Niki Weiss, and together we'll explore how to protect yourself in a world where both your physical and digital legacy leave a lasting impact. All right. Well, thank you, Michael, for joining.
Thanks.
All the way from
Glad
Florida.
to
Welcome. You know, I have never met PI probate, right? So I know what a PI is, private investigator, and then probate. So what is it about this specialty, being a PI probate? What got you here? And then talk a little bit more about probate for someone who might not understand that process.
Right. So I'll first explain what probate is. Probate is, simply put, the process of dealing with someone's affairs and property after they passed away. So it's a matter of someone dies, and then you have to determine who gets what, whether there's a will or not. You still have probates. So my role in it as follows, as the probate PI, is I started my career actually as an attorney, and then in 2001 started a business dealing with recovering unclaimed property, money that's sitting in government treasuries, and then finding the owners and getting it to them, and realized that there's the same need in probate where someone dies and people don't know who the heirs are or where they are. So we will find them and get them their money. Also do investigations into finding assets that the person left behind, where the person would have taken that information to the grave, and the executor or trustee, whoever is handling things, just doesn't know what the person owned. We'll do an investigation to determine what's out there and get as much as we can into the heir's hands.
I mean, for most people, I ask them, what kind of it with my final playbook systems, right? So we look at the legal, financial, physical, and digital aspects of the life they've built today. And when I say to somebody, do you have a will or a trust? They're like, I've got a will. I'm not worried about it. But they might not understand that will would go through probate. Can you talk a little bit more about, like, every state's different, the complexity of probate? Just because you have a will doesn't necessarily mean that there's not going to be a legal ramification around it.
So a will itself is going to go through probate. There's a difference between a will and a trust. The way to think about a trust is that it is a separate entity from the person. Just like if you own a company and you incorporate it with the state, that company is considered a separate entity from the owners. Same thing with the trust. So if someone has a trust, then that trust lives on after the person passes away, and therefore, if everything the person owns is titled in the trust, and I'll explain in a second, then after the person dies, the trust can go on and be distributed without having court proceedings. When I say titled, it means that, just say I have a trust, and it's called the Michael Zwick Trust, and I buy a house or I own a house. So what I can do is I can have a deed. Just say I already own the house. I can have a deed from Michael Zwick, the individual, to the Michael Zwick Trust. Now, I no longer own that house. My trust owns that house. So if everything's done right and you have a trust, everything is titled in the name of the trust. And therefore, after a person dies, whoever is the new trustee, whoever's the trustee after the person dies, can continue the trust going, and usually, in the case we're talking about here, will then distribute the trust assets to the beneficiary without having to get the court involved. The only time a trust goes into court proceeding is if there are issues, whether there's a fight between the beneficiaries or there's a ambiguity in the trust, and the trustee wants to cover his or her own butt, so they might go to the court and say, hey, judge, we want you to clarify this issue for us. But most trusts don't go through the probate process. If there's not a trust, or there are assets that are not properly put into the trust, then the assets that are in the name of someone who has passed away will have to go through the probate process. The process, yes, the laws are different from state to state, but the general idea is that someone files a petition or an application to start the proceeding, lays out, lists all of the heirs and beneficiaries. And let me back up there, because those are two different things. You can be an heir and not a beneficiary.
Oh,
So, for example, when someone dies, their children are their heirs. An heir is not necessarily a beneficiary, and a beneficiary is not necessarily an heir. So, if someone has children and they leave everything in their estate to a charity, just say St. Jude's, one of the most well-known charities out there, then the children are heirs, because by virtue of being the closest relatives to the decedent, the children are the heirs, but they're not beneficiaries. St. Jude, on the flip side, is a beneficiary, but is not an heir because it's not related to the person.
if I have a dog and I want to, my dog be my beneficiary versus my
No.
children?
So when you sometimes do hear about someone who leaves their estate to a pet, you cannot leave. You can only leave your property to a party that is capable of owning property. So a person like you or me can own property. A corporation, a nonprofit can own property. By American law, probably by every country's law, an animal cannot own property. So when you hear of money being left, or estate being left to a pet, really it's being left into a trust. So it's being left into a fund where someone is appointed as the trustee to use the money for the benefit of the pet. And then in most cases, what I believe happens is that, or probably all of them, is that upon the death of the pet, then the trust will terminate, and whatever's left in it will get distributed to whoever. So, the most famous case is Leona Helmsley, the hotel and other owner of other stuff, who left her massive estate to her pet. Really, she left it to a trust. And when that dog, I think it was, passed away, I'm assuming that everything went to a charity or to some people, whoever the case might be.
Wow. I mean, you hear about those stories often
Yeah.
enough. So
But basically, it should come as no surprise as that most reporters are not up to date on the law, and they tend to generalize things without. And that goes for probate. That goes for most. Some reporters are very good, but or people just read the headlines and they don't read the actual article that fleshes out the whole story.
So as a private investigator, I mean, you're stepping in because the family or the estate, or is it the municipality or the actual state, federal government? I mean, who contacts you to say there's unclaimed assets?
So in probate cases, it's usually the attorney or the executor or trustee that will call. So just yesterday, I got a call from an attorney in northern Michigan who has an estate that he's handling. A woman had passed away. Her husband predeceased her. She had no children. Some family friend or whatever is the executor, but doesn't know who the family is. So he asked us to look into it to find the heirs. So that's how we get some of our cases. We get attorneys, executors, trust people who handle trusts or estates at banks will call us and ask us to step in on that. But we also take the initiative to find out what money is sitting in various government treasuries, and then try to find the owners. A lot of times those owners have passed away, so we'll contact the heirs and work out a deal with them to give them the information, and then get them their money. In exchange, we get a share of whatever they're receiving.
So I think many people don't understand, and I'm going to let you explain it as though 101 is that if you die in intestate, right? So someone dies and they don't have any heirs, right? So what does that process go through?
Okay, so every state has on its books it defines who is an heir that is entitled to inherit if there's no will. So, like, if someone has a will, assuming the will is properly executed and meets whatever legal requirements, whoever is listed in the will gets the inheritance. With some exceptions, obviously, like you can't disinherit your spouse unless there's a prenup, but that's a different story. Um, if there's no will, then you have what you just, as you probably said, intestate. Intestate says, okay, here's who inherits if the person doesn't have a will. So first in line are obviously going to be spouse, and the children, grandchildren, and so on and so forth of a person are called the issue. So person's spouse and issue are first in line to inherit. If a person doesn't have a spouse or issue, then the deceased parents will inherit. If the parents are not around either, then it goes to the deceased siblings. If the siblings aren't around, then it goes to their children, their issue. If they're none of that, then it goes to, you go up to look at the grandparents, and do the grandparents have any issue or descendants? So sometimes we might find heirs or we might find relatives, but they're too far outside the statutory scope of who can inherit. In which case, nobody can get it.
So what happens to it?
So the money typically gets turned over to the county or to the state. And, if at some point an heir is found that qualifies under law, that heir and can come forward and say, okay, I'm an heir, let me have it.
But then they have to prove it, right? So then for them to
Right.
say I'm an heir, then they're hiring a lawyer that they have to go through the court system in order to.
Right, but yeah, they have to file a petition or a motion to have the court recognize that person or people as the heirs. The standard of proof varies from state to state. Some states are very, very rigid and really requiring very exact documentation. Other courts I've seen are a little looser, but the gist of it, yeah, you do have to go to court to establish. In most states, yes, you don't necessarily have to have an attorney, but it certainly is advisable to have one.
But still, that's people who might not have the funds, the resources to be able to hire, or the whereabouts, or that it ends up being another twist and turn in the estate planning
Right.
process.
It is, but at the same time, if there's a pot of money waiting for them, some attorneys will take it on a contingency fee basis or somehow work out a deal that they all get paid. There are also companies that will give you an advance on your inheritance, and then they get a piece of the pie whenever it gets paid out, and then the people can use that money to pay for the term. There are various ways to go about it. It might fall on there's now what's called litigation funding. My guess is that you might be able to apply for that. So usually the process only takes a few weeks or months of doing that. So it could be, get a loan, for your bank or whatever. If you can get one, might be the way to go as well.
It's another thing that people would have to figure out, right? And that's
Yeah,
all part of, death and dying in the digital age, trying to understand the complexity that's involved.
right.
And just because you have a will doesn't mean that the distribution is going to flow easily or the way you expect it to go.
Right. As I have said, where there's a will is not always a way, and conversely, where there's not a will, there's still a way.
Oh, and that's encouraging to know. Recently, I have gotten introduced to a new term that hit hard for me. Um, elder orphans. Elder orphans. And it took me a moment, and then I realized with our aging population, more and more people not having children, or an elder orphan to me is someone who might be in their, let's say, I'll just put an age out there, in their 60s or older, whose parents have already passed away, and maybe they don't have children, or they are estranged from their family, and they really do feel alone in the world, like an orphan. I guess what happens to their assets, whether they have significant assets, or maybe they might be in a situation where all they have is their home.
Right. So that's the type of case we actually get fairly often. Just got a call yesterday. It's not really so much a case as just kind of like a request to help out with one. Yesterday, a friend of mine down in Boca Raton, Florida, said that she's a realtor. So the head of the HOA where she lives said, "Hey, that house, whatever neighborhood, we got to do something about it." The woman who owned it passed away. She had been, I think, a widow. Didn't have. Turns out she didn't have children, and there was somebody. Must be somebody she knew would every so often check in on her. Well, apparently this person hadn't sent the police. The woman wasn't returning calls. Sent the police. The police went to do a wellness visit, and they found that this woman found her in the shower. Apparently, she'd been in for already a week. And
She passed away in the shower, and she had been there a week before.
I believe that's how long she had been dead before they found her. Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, terrible. And so now their immediate concern is they want to deal with this house because if no one's taking care of it, no one's paying the bills, no one's mowing the lawn or whatever. It's a problem for the HOA, but also they want to see what's done right. Like I said, this is a house in Boca Raton. The woman lived there for 30 years, so presumably it's been paid off and is probably worth it if it's an HOA, it's probably worth at least mid to high six figures, if not more. We don't know what other assets are out there, but most likely this woman has an estate of over $1 million, and if she has relatives that qualify as heirs, they probably didn't even know that she's dead. We might wind up working on that case. We'll see. It's they think that there's a nephew out there, but they don't know his name and how to find him. So we might get involved, and hopefully, the nephew might just come forward on his own, to check in on her and find out what happened to her. We'll see.
Have you had any ever situations where you've done the investigation and you have made the determination that the actual legal heirs are not, there are legal heirs, and then there are people that have actually been involved in the person's life? Somehow there ends up being a dispute about, like one I'm thinking about is Aretha Franklin, for example. She's probably the biggest, one of the most well-known probate debates issues that happened out there. But have you run into situations where the family starts fighting because what was put down on paper is not what agreed to, but that they are contesting?
Right. So it definitely happens. What we've seen it sometimes is a family member will just not even list another family member on the probate papers because they feel that he or she didn't deserve to inherit anything. So we had a case like that, actually in Macomb County, which is right next to Oakland County, where Aretha lived and where her estate was probated, where the woman died and she had 3 children, 2 daughters and a son. And the daughters filed for probate, and they listed only themselves as heirs and didn't even mention that there was this 3rd child. Years later, I don't remember, something came out. I think, actually, no, they listed him. I'm sorry, they listed him, but they said, "Oh, we don't know where he is." So they deposited his money with the county treasurer, and under Michigan law, after 3 years, if he didn't come forward, they'd be able to claim it for themselves. So we found out about it. We found he was living right near his sisters. They knew full well where he was. So when we brought him forward, rather than say, "Oh, we didn't know," they just said, like, "Well, we don't think he deserved any money because he was an awful person, an awful son." And our argument was, yeah, not my place to make that call. It's just the law is pretty clear, and that here he is, and he wants his money. And one of the things they also said was they expended money on behalf of their mother, and he didn't, or he stole from. I don't remember exactly what it was. And I made the argument to the judge, and the judge agreed. It's like, well, your time to make that argument was, when you open the estates, not 2 years after the fact. So sometimes, but if someone does expend a lot of money in care of the deceased, took care of them, whatever, they can make a claim as a creditor. In addition to being an heir, they can wear their 2 hats. They can say, "I'm a creditor because I spent all this money taking care of mom, and also whatever's left over after I get reimbursed, I also get a share of that. So there are ways to do that, to get reimbursed for those costs.
So in the same melodramatic situation, right? So children that are born out of wedlock, right? So there are children out there that someone might not have known about. And yet there's proof that the decedent had these children. Is that a claim to an estate that you would dig into?
So yeah, so that we're working on a case right now. It's actually just working on it yesterday. A woman died with no known heirs, and we know she was born out of wedlock back in the 50s out in Mississippi. And we know that her mother wound up marrying later, and but it took a while. We were able to track down her birth father's obituary, and it does list, even though this woman had actually taken on the last name of her stepfather. Uh, we don't think she had much of a relationship, but she was listed in the obituary of her father, and he listed other siblings. So those siblings are actually her half brother and sisters, and they're going to inherit. I don't even know if they've ever met her in her lifetime, but now they're now going to inherit a sizable estate.
Wow. I mean, the
So
unknown.
there's a phrase called laughing heirs, which are for people who didn't even know the deceased, but all of a sudden get calls from someone like me saying, "Hey, great news! Well, partly good news, partly bad news. Partly bad news is you've lost a relative. The good news is you're going to inherit a lot of money."
I mean, let's just talk about it. I mean, do people, like, you literally call them on the phone? They're not going to pick up the number because they don't recognize your, right? You know,
Right.
and you basically say to them, "You don't know me, but," and do they hang up on you? Do they actually call you back?
So some we start out by calling. Some we'll send a letter with our retainer agreement and information about us. We've long said that our biggest competition is not another company's skepticism. So we spent a lot of time a few years after we started the company, and we got our legs under us, really working on our image. We developed what I think still to be a very credible website that presents a good image. When we send a letter, it's on our stationery. Obviously, now we send a lot by email. We will send a nice color reprint of a Washington Post article that we were mentioned in favorably. We tout the fact that we have an A+ rating with Better Business Bureau, or licensed as a private investigator. So we kind of put our credentials right there out on the table. So this way, people will say, "Hey, I could trust you." So a number of years ago, we sent an agreement to a woman who was due some money, and like we sent 4 months later, she all of a sudden just signs and sends it back with no communication in between, which is very rare. If usually it takes some communication to get someone to sign, or they're going to sign it right away. That kind of waiting for a while. So we asked her, like, why did you all of a sudden after 4 months decide to sign this? She says, frankly, she says, I got your letter and your agreement, and I put it on the corner of my desk, and I just let it sit there for a while. And then this past Sunday, I opened up the newspaper, and there's an article about you. Uh, and then that made me realize, oh, wait a minute, I got a letter from them. And they were a legitimate company. So she wound up signing and sending us back her contract. And we wound up getting her money. So, sometimes it's letting people know or reassuring them that we are a legitimate company.
So if someone gets a letter and the letter says, "In order to receive your inheritance, please send us, your bank account information," or, that's not legit. Don't
Right.
do that.
So one of the things we say is we will never ask you for your bank account information, your credit for a credit card. We will never ask you to give us a dime until you've gotten paid. We work on a contingency basis, which means we only get paid out of what we deliver, and we only get paid when the clients get what's coming to them. So we will never ask a client, "Hey, while you're waiting for your money, send us our fee." We only get paid when they have their money in hand.
And that's important to realize the difference between legitimate and scams. And the scammers
Exactly.
are out there. Can you give, what should people be looking for if you're the legitimate, if you're the gold star when it comes to probate investigators, private investigators, what are some of those like warning signs that people should be staying far away from?
So it's things like asking for information upfront, information like bank account or credit card, stuff like that, um, or asking for um, or saying, "Hey, I want an upfront fee." That's a major red flag. Um, Also, just check out the credentials. Go to the Better Business Bureau, check if they're licensed. Most of the good actors in my business, or all of them, are licensed as private investigators because really by law you have to be. I mean, no one's really policing it so much, but by law you have to be licensed as a private investigator. Um,
Interesting.
or ask for referrals. Say, hey, can you give me a referral? And I wouldn't take a Joe Schmo as the referral because you have no idea if that person just but ask it like for attorneys because anybody who's in my line of business has had to work with attorneys to process some of the estates. So say, hey, can I have the name of an attorney or two who could vouch for you?
Fascinating. And I've never really worked with a private investigator before. So I didn't, that's new to me. I didn't realize that all private investigators are they federally licensed or state licensed?
Every state or almost every state has a licensing requirement for people who are engaging in the act of being a private investigator, which includes helping people recover their assets or to find people. Um, so in those two states, you don't have to be licensed. Every place else, you do have to be licensed. And if you're not, and you are doing work and you're getting paid for it without a license, you can be not only civilly liable but also criminally charged.
Oh,
It is a state by state thing. Every state has different requirements for what it takes to be a private investigator, both in terms of what experience or educational background you have to be a PI. Some states have exams that you have to take. All of them you have. I'm licensed in a number of states, and in all of them I've had to be fingerprinted, which gets run through the state and federal criminal background search. In some states, I have to, when I renew my license every 2 or 3 years, I have to go through the same process of being fingerprinted and had to continue to do continuing education. So it's not hard. It's not as hard as say medical school, I'm sure, but it's there's definitely some things you have to go through to get a license to show that you are trustworthy. They're not going to give a license to someone who has a felony conviction for fraud or embezzlement or something like that.
needless to say. So I just want to take a little bit of a turn because international, like how does the United States, so if someone passes away in the United States, but they are an immigrant, right? They came here on a F1 visa or, an H1, they've established residency, even maybe have citizenship, but their family, their heirs are in another country. How does that impact the work that you do?
So sometimes it can make things very difficult depending on what country they came from and how long ago they immigrated. And so, if someone came from Cuba or North Korea, that's extremely
One of our
difficult.
restricted countries, right?
Yeah, countries. So different countries are easier than others. What people don't realize is the U.S. is an extremely open country in terms of information on finding people, finding addresses, phone numbers, and stuff like that, and getting court records on people, ordering death certificates. So some countries are just much, much easier than others. But my company, we've located and recovered for people in a few dozen countries around the world, including some you would think might be difficult, like Pakistan. It definitely can be a challenge, but we do what we can to persevere.
Interesting. Okay, so let's do a rating. Easiest states to do probate in.
I would say Michigan is pretty easy, and part of it is my familiarity. I can't say I've familiar with all the states. Michigan's pretty easy. Oklahoma, which we've done a lot of work in, is fairly straightforward and pretty easy. Florida's not too bad. Um, yeah, I'd say they're probably some of the easier ones that I've seen.
Okay, and then someone calls you up and they're from the two states that you're just start cringing, shaking your head like, oh, here we go.
Well, New York is particularly difficult.
And why is
I
that?
mean, we're not the ones handling the probate, so that's not really on us. What makes New York very difficult at times is that sometimes the courts will be very, very demanding on proving that someone is an heir. To extent, sometimes you have to what's called prove the negative. So if someone comes forward and says, I'm the deceased nephew and I'm the son of the deceased sister, and I'm the only heir. The court might say, okay, prove to us that the deceased didn't have any other siblings and that you didn't have any other siblings, which is called proving the negative. So at that point, then you have to hire a genealogist who doesn't have an interest in the estate. So we couldn't do this because we have a financial interest in our clients getting paid. So we'd have to hire a genealogist who is who's been certified as a court expert to do their own research and then say, okay, we're satisfied that there were no other people, and that costs money. And New York, and at least in the New York City area, let's just say the courts don't move that fast. Same thing with some of the other big cities as well. LA, Chicago, their courts also tend to be slow. That's our biggest hurdle, is not so much the how hard the work is, so much as it is the bureaucracy that goes into it.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay. So what have you done to ensure that you're not a client of yourself, right? So what are those best practices that you can recommend to people to make sure that as they're starting to move forward and building out their final playbook, their plan, what are your recommendations, lessons learned?
I think the biggest key is just to make sure that somebody else has your information on who and where the people, your beneficiaries or heirs are, and what assets you have. You don't want to take that information to the grave with you. And when it comes to, if you're leaving, if you have your family, for me, I mean, my wife knows who all my relatives are, including herself. So that's not really an issue. And we share information about what assets we have. So if God forbid something happened to me, my wife would know what institutions to go to get whatever bank accounts, brokerage accounts, whatever the case might be. It's really just about having information that someone else will have when you shuffle off this mortal coil.
Well, listen, I appreciate all your time and expertise. We will go ahead and make sure that you are easily accessible, easy to find on best place to locate you, your website.
I would say either website or LinkedIn. Yeah.
And LinkedIn. And we'll put all that information in with your
Great.
bio. So with that, we will say thank you. And like I said, if you need a probate PI, you know where to find it. Thanks,
Great.
Michael.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. I hope this conversation inspired you to take control and plan for the inevitable to protect yourself and those you leave behind. Don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter at digitallegacypodcast.com. Remember, life is full of surprises. What happens after you die shouldn't be. So keep your passwords safe and your playbook up to date.